Sir.
Morning,
Morning,
sir.
sir. Good morning po.
Okay, so this is block B of statics of rigid bodies. Okay, our subject is statics of rigid bodies, and this subject is one of the components of engineering mechanics. Okay, and engineering mechanics is a science dealing with conditions of rest or motion of bodies under the action of forces. Now, engineering mechanics, as I've said, is divided into parts. We have statics and dynamics. And statics is the study of the effects of forces on bodies at rest or in a state of uniform motion, while dynamics is the study of particles and bodies in motion. However, dynamics is further subdivided into kinematics and kinetics. And kinematics is the study of motion without reference to the forces which cause the motion. Kinetics, on the other hand, is the study of the effects of unbalanced forces on the study of bodies which have accelerated motion. Now, there are four fundamental quantities involved in the study of engineering mechanics: force, distance, time, and mass. Now, the free body diagram, or FBD, is an aid or tool used in the analysis of problems in engineering mechanics. And FBD usually shows a body or its part isolated from physical contact with other bodies, drawn together with all the forces acting on it and the applicable axis. Okay, so we have the objectives. At the end of the semester, the student must be able to explain the principles of three-dimensional forces, static wedge and belt friction, determine the centroid, centers of mass, centers of gravity of objects, moment and mass moment of inertia. Okay, so yung dalawa lang, no? Kasi itong 3 and 4 pertain to dynamics. Okay? Now, for chapter 1, we will be dealing with concurrent spatial force systems. And this deals with a concurrent spatial force system in which the lines of action of all the forces in the system act through a common point. Now, topics covered in this chapter include review of two-dimensional coplanar force systems, rectangular components of a spatial force, force acting through 2 points, resultant of a concurrent spatial force system, and equilibrium of a concurrent spatial force system. Okay, to introduce lesson 1, this is about a brief review on coplanar force systems that have been discussed in your junior and senior high school years. Okay? And even in your physics in first year college. No? It is worthy to recall that coplanar force systems are two-dimensional force systems that lie on the same plane, and majority of the problems in mechanics involves forces in a plane. But there are problems that involve force systems in three-dimensional space, and we call this spatial force systems. Okay, at the end of this lesson, the student must be able to demonstrate the coplanar force systems excuse me, through the aid of an FBD, no? And then demonstrate the spatial force systems in a three-dimensional axis. And then with the aid of the axis, explain and demonstrate the difference between the coplanar force systems and the spatial force systems. Now, you are supposed to take first the self-assessment test before going through the content, no? But you can just answer this later on, no? Kasi masyadong late na tayo nag-start. Okay? Because of yung enrollment procedures. Okay? Very complex yung enrollment, no? Yung system. Minsan nag-bar down, okay? And hindi kaya yung sa freshmen, no? Marami kasing mga na-delay na mga procedures. Okay? So you can just take this later on. Okay, so let's start with the content. So we have the equivalent force systems, and they are equivalent if and only if they produce the same mechanical effect on a rigid body. Okay? Now, the term resultant is the single force that will represent or that will be equivalent to a given force system. Okay? So that's the meaning of the resultant. Now, another meaning of resultant is the summation, no, of all the given forces acting on a body at a common point. Okay? So siya yung sum of all the forces acting on a certain body. Okay? So when we say sum, we simply do not add, no? But we apply the summation of vectors. Yun yung ibig sabihin nun. Hindi yan yung usual na addition na 10 plus 5 plus negative 6. Hindi yan ganun, no? It's not the simple addition that is referred by the summation, but we are going to sum up all the forces vectorially, no? So meaning to say, we sum up all the horizontal component as well as the vertical components, and then we apply the Pythagorean Theorem to come up with the resultant. The Parallelogram Law, okay, is one way of getting the resultant graphically. Okay, I think you had this when you had your physics laboratory in high school. Okay, yung parallelogram law is applicable only to two given forces. Okay, limited to two forces. If we add them graphically, then we use parallelogram law. Okay, we transfer the first force to the tip or the arrowhead of the second force with the same line of action, of course, no? With the original line of action of the first force. And then after transferring the first force to the tip or the arrowhead of the second, we draw a parallelogram. We complete the figure by making it a parallelogram. No? So, yung meron kayong first and second arrow, so hindi pa yan enclosed, di ba? So you enclose them using dotted lines in such a way that you came up with a parallelogram. Now, the longer diagonal of the parallelogram serves as the resultant of the two given forces. Okay? So yun yung parallelogram law. Graphical way of finding the resultant. We measure using ruler or scale the magnitudes of the forces and the resultant. And then the angle of the resultant is measured using a protractor. Okay? So that is parallelogram law. Parallelogram is just a twisted rectangle, no? Parang tinabingi siyang rectangle. Especially the sides or the width of the rectangle. Okay? Now, a rectangle is a parallelogram, but a parallelogram can never be a rectangle. Okay? Kasi yung rectangle requires 4 right angles. Okay, while in parallelogram, you can never find a right angle. Okay, there are two acute angles and two obtuse angles in a parallelogram. Okay, so the components, so we have the x and the y components, or sometimes we call them the horizontal and the vertical components, represented by f sub x and f sub y. Okay, so here we have f is equal to fx plus fy. It's not a simple addition, no? Okay, we do not add the x component together with the y, no? Now this representation simply means that we add them vectorially. Okay, so, and this simply means that the given force can be represented into its x component and y component. Okay, so for example, we have this, no? So example of a parallelogram method of getting the resultant. Suppose we are given F1 and F2, no? So those are the two given forces, and we need to find the resultant of the two forces. So as I've said, we transfer this force F2 to the head or the tip of F1, no? So ito, i-transfer natin, ito na siya, itong dotted line na siya. Okay? Then we draw a parallelogram. So mayroon kayong ditong F1, ito yung F2. So silang dalawa lang, enclose them using this dotted line. Okay? So meron na tayong parallelogram. Okay? Now, to find the resultant, we need to measure this F, no, from O up to that point. And that is the resultant or the vector sum of this F1 and F2. Okay? So F is equal to F1 plus F2. Okay, vectorially. Okay? So F, okay, is the resultant. Ito yung kanyang angle. Okay? Now, to make it, itong sa figure B naman are the components, no? Okay, if we are given the force F from O to A, no? So this is origin up to point A, no? So that is F. Now, if we are going to resolve this F into its components, so ito yung Fx, ang kanyang horizontal, at ito ang kanyang vertical component. Now, this angle theta is the direction of the force. Okay? Now, this theta is a certain degree, no? Certain degrees above the positive x. Okay? So the forces must be represented by its magnitude as well as its direction. Fx is its x component because it is along the x or parallel to the x, and Fy is its y component or vertical component and along the y or parallel to the y-axis. Okay? So itong F can also be represented by the components. Now, to get Fx, so we have F cosine theta because Fx is adjacent to this angle. Okay? So we derive this equation from this right triangle. Ito yung right triangle. Okay? Right angle siya dito sa C. Okay? 90 degrees. So Fx is cosine. Okay? F cosine theta, that is equal to Fx. Similarly, Fy is F sine theta kasi itong Fy is also the same as AC. Itong AC, itong vertical line, no? That is 90 degrees with respect to x, no? So, this side of the right triangle, the shorter side, no, of triangle AOC, okay, AC is the shorter side and it is opposite the angle theta, so we make use of the sine function. Fy is equal to F sine theta. Now, in the event that the angle is with respect to the vertical, magre-reverse tong dalawa, no? Pag kinuha mo yung Fx, magiging F sine theta. And for Fy, F cosine theta kapag yung theta mo ay with respect to the y-axis. Okay? So there is a reversal of the trigonometric functions. So ibig sabihin, itong equation sa 2-2 ay hindi laging ganito. Okay? Nag-i-interchange itong cosine theta at sine theta kapag yung angle ay hindi naka-reference sa x but naka-reference sa y. Okay? So better not to memorize this. Okay? Huwag kayong mag-memorize. Dito kayo mag-derive ng formula. Okay? Kung saan ninyo nakikita yung angle. Of course, to get the magnitude of the resultant, we make use of the Pythagorean Theorem. Okay? And that is the square root of the sum of squares. Okay? The square root of fx squared plus fy squared. Or this came from what? F squared is equal to fx squared plus fy squared. That is Pythagorean. But since we are only after f, hindi naman tayo after ng f squared, so that's why we extract the square root. Okay? Now, since the resultant is a vector quantity, then we need its direction also. Okay? And for example, alpha is the angle of the resultant or the reference angle, then we make use of the inverse function. No? So, and that is equal to arctangent of the absolute value of Fy over Fx. Okay? Now, the angle that will be, the angle that results from this equation must be always an acute angle. Okay? Referenced either along the positive x or along the negative x-axis, and is described either as above or below the positive x and above or below the negative x-axis. Okay? Now, the angle is always with respect to x and never with respect to y. Okay? Now, forget about these quadrantal angles. Itong mga mina-minus pa, mako-confuse lang kayo. Dito na lang tayo mag-focus. And you can always result to an acute angle and based on either above or below the positive or the negative x-axis. Okay? Kasi itong mga with reference to quadrantal angles, binase ng author dito is the standard angle starting from 0 degrees rotating counterclockwise. Okay? At gagamit ka dito ng mga malalaking angle. Okay? So kapag nasa second quadrant yung force, gagamit ka ng more than 90 degrees. Obtuse angle ang gagamitin. 91 degrees, 110 degrees, 120. Whereas, if we just simply make use of angles referenced along the x, maliliit na angle lang ang gagamitin natin. Okay? Acute angles, less than 90 degrees. Okay, let's take an example. Resolve the 500 Newton force exerted on the hook on the figure below, no, into horizontal and vertical components. So there is a hook fixed maybe on the ceiling. Okay? So ito yung hook. Merong force na in-exert sa hook. Okay? Itong force na to downward to the right. The magnitude is 500 newtons and the direction of the force is 30 degrees below the positive x. Okay? If we take this point of the hook and the arrow as the origin. Okay? So kung ito yung origin, dito tayo gagawa ng y-axis, x-axis. Okay? That is why I described earlier the force as 500 newtons, 30 degrees below the positive x. Okay? Now, you need to draw a free body diagram for this using the hook and the tail of the force as the origin. Ito na siya. Okay? Ito. So this is the force, the original force, 30 degrees below the positive x, nasa fourth quadrant. Okay? Now we are to resolve this force into its x component and y component. Okay? Now, so dito makikita nyo, standard angle yung ginamit. Not 30 degrees, but instead 330 degrees. Why? Because we trace the angle of the force. So from x going counterclockwise, nag 90 degrees, nag 180, nag 270, plus 60, that's why nag 330. Okay? But as I've said, we will not use 330, but it's what? The acute angle with respect to x. Okay? So paano natin makuha yung 30? 360 minus 330. Yun yung angle na 30 degrees. Okay? Now, yung 30 degrees below the positive x is also the same as negative 30 degrees. Why negative 30 degrees? Because if we start from x, we go clockwise direction, and that is 30 degrees. Okay? Now, in trigonometry, if the direction of the angle is clockwise, that is negative. Okay? So, kaya ito yung negative 30 degrees. Ito yung negative dito. It just denotes that the angle, okay, of the force is counterclockwise from the x. Ano, clockwise from the x. Okay? In trigonometry kasi, negative yung clockwise direction, and counterclockwise is always a positive angle direction. Okay? So we now get the component. So using the 30 degrees, it should be 500 cosine 30. Okay? Ito kasi, pwede rin to, as I've said, ginamit lang yung standard angle. Okay? The cosine of 330 and the cosine of 30 are the same. Okay? That is 0.866 something. Okay? So that is 500 cosine 30, positive 433.01 newtons. So positive. Why positive? Because on the fourth quadrant, the cosine is positive. Let's have an agreement that the final answers must always be expressed as or rounded off to 2 decimal place. Always. Okay? So dito sa statics. Okay? So final answers must always be expressed in 2 decimal places or up to hundreds place. Okay? So the exact for that, the exact value is 433.01 newtons. Now similarly, the y component is 500 sine 30. Okay? Negative 500 sine 30 because sine in the fourth quadrant is always negative. So that is why you have there negative. And 30 degrees, that is pi over 6 radians. No? And the sine of pi over 6 is 1/2. So 1/2 of 500. So we have negative 250 newtons. Okay? Why negative? Because in the fourth quadrant, the y component is negative. So as you can see, the y component is directed vertically downward. No? So yun yung negative sign. Vertically down, negative. Itong fx directed horizontally to the right, positive. Now, kapag from the origin, vertically up, that is positive. And then from the origin, going horizontally to the left, that is negative. Okay? So dito Fy is negative because it is vertically down. Fx is horizontally to the right, that's why it is positive. Okay? So these are the final answers. Positive 433.01 newtons, negative 250.00 newtons. Because as I've said, 2 decimal place. Okay? Now, in the event that final answers already reach thousands, millions, billions, trillions, and so on. Okay? Make use of the appropriate prefixes. Okay? So halimbawa, yung Fx umabot ng 1,433 newtons, then represent that instead as 1.43 kilo newtons. Kasi umabot na siya ng thousands. Okay? Para maliliit na numbers ang isusulat nyo. Okay? So 1,433 newtons or 1.43 kilo newtons. Understood? So pag umabot naman ng millions, mega. Okay? Billions, giga or giga. Okay? So yun yung agreement natin. Ha? Okay, for two or more forces, F1, theta 1, itong F2, standard angle niya, yung theta sub 2. But we can also have an option that we can make use of this acute angle, itong maliit. And how are you going to get this? Subtract theta sub 2 from a straight angle para makuha nyo to. Okay? So 180 minus theta sub 2 para makuha nyo yung acute angle with respect to the negative x. Okay? Now, similarly, itong theta sub 3, the direction of F3, so this is more than 180 but less than 270. So this can be, I think, 260 or 250 degrees. Pwede rin yun, but as I've said, I prefer the acute angle with respect to the x, no? So gusto ko tong angle na to with respect to the negative x or below the negative x. So, and how are you going to get this? Okay, we have theta sub 3 minus 180 degrees para makuha nyo itong acute angle. Okay? Theta sub 3, whatever it is, minus yung straight angle na 180 so that you can arrive at this acute angle. Okay? So the resultant is the vector sum. So kung pinapakuha yung resultant nitong tatlong force, okay, you need to add them vectorially. So you have to add F1 plus F2 plus F3. As I've said, it is not a simple addition. No? Addition of vectors yan. Okay, F1 plus F2 plus F3. Okay, so Rx is the x component of the resultant. Ry is the y component. And Rx is also the same as summation of f of x. Ry is summation of f1. Now, the summation sign, you use this in your engineering data analysis, that the Greek symbol for sigma, no, is this one, no? And it denotes summation, the Greek capital letter sigma. So you meaning to say you have to add all the x component and add all the y component algebraically. Okay? So this time, algebraically. So you have to consider the signs. Okay? Okay, let's take another example. Find the resultant of the two forces F1 and F2 acting on the eye bolt. So ito yung eye bolt may be fixed on the ground. So my eye bolt, and there is F1, 200 Newton magnitude, directed 30 degrees above the positive x, considering that this is the origin, yung eye bolt. So this is positive x, and this is the positive y. No? Now, another force acting on the eye bolt is F2 with 100 Newton force, directed 50 degrees with respect to the positive y-axis. Okay, ito siya. Oh, this is an example wherein the force, the angle of the force, F2, is referenced with respect to the vertical axis. Okay? So kung ito yung gagamitin nyo, 50 degrees, sa pagkuha ng component ng F2, there will be a reversal of trigonometric functions. If you are getting Fx, then use sine function. And if you are getting Fy, use cosine function. Okay? Kasi naka-attach siya sa y. But another option is that you can also make use of this angle. So you extend the x, negative x na to, gamitin nyo itong angle with respect to the negative x. And how are you going to do that? You subtract 50 from 90 degrees. Kasi yung buong second quadrant is 90, di ba? Minus 50. So magkakaroon kayo dito ng acute angle equal to 40 degrees, which is the complement of 50 degrees. Okay? So yung 40 na yon, pwede nyo rin gamitin instead of 50. At kapag ginamit nyo yung 40, you need not reverse the function. Yung usual na formula. Kung fx, cosine. Kung fy, sine. Okay? So transform the given figure into free body diagram. So this is already the FBD. 30 degrees, o dito yung F2, tingnan nyo, no? Standard angle. Okay? So naging 140 kasi inad yung 50 plus the first quadrant, which is 90. Okay? So 50 plus 90, kaya naging 140. But gagamitin din natin itong maliit, sabi ko, yung acute angle na lang. So paano ito makukuha? You subtract 140 from 180, yung straight angle. So you will get this 40 degrees. Okay? So to get the resultant, get first the components. So 200 cosine 30, okay, minus 100 sine of 50, kung 50 gagamitin. Okay? So 200 cosine 30 minus 100 sine ng 50. Okay? Why minus? Because nasa second quadrant. X component is negative. Now similarly, for the y component, 200 sine 30 plus 100 cosine of 50. Okay? So you will get these values, 96.6 and then 164.8. Now both are positive. Nakikita nyo, these are very important. Okay? So pag parehas ang positive, meaning to say, the x and the y components are positive, then we can be sure that the resultant is located on the first quadrant. Kasi sa first quadrant, both are positive. Okay? But these are just, itong na-compute dito, Rx, Ry, those are just components, no, of the resultant. Hindi naman yung pinapahanap. Ang pinapahanap is resultant. Itong na-solve dito, components of resultant. Okay? So to get the resultant, we apply the Pythagorean Theorem. This is the formula. Okay? The square root of the summation of squares. Okay? So that is 190.6 newtons. So that is just the magnitude. So resultant is a vector. Quantity, it must also have a direction. So arctangent of Ry over Rx, so we have 59.5 degrees. As you can see, you have this. Huwag na itong gamitin natin, no? We simply write 190.6 newtons, 59.5 degrees above the positive x-axis. Paano natin nasabing above the positive x? Because of these signs na both are positive. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, another example is determine the resultant of the 5 forces. So if you have, or if you are given 5 forces, then the best thing to do is tabulate the results. Make a table with 3 columns Okay? And the number of rows is always equal to the number of forces plus 2. So since there are 5 forces plus 2, so ang row ninyo should be 7. Why 7? Because yung 5 row doon ay for the forces. The first row and the last row will represent the title, okay, yung title ng fx, fy, or horizontal component, vertical component. And the last row will represent the summation of all the forces. Okay? So ito yon. So gawin nyo only 3 columns. Huwag nyo nang idagdag itong second and third. Wala naman tong significance, no? Ang importante, ito first column, second column, and then last column. Tatlo lang. The column for the forces, the x component of the force, the y component of the force. So ito yung first row, yung title, at ito yung last row, summation. So number of forces plus 2, yun yung number of rows. But the columns is always equal to 3. No? Tatlo lang. Huwag nyo na itong kopyahin. Now the summation sign indicates that we need to sum up all the x component algebraically. So meaning to say, we need to consider the signs, the negative signs also. No? So ito ganun din, we need to add all the y components algebraically. Okay? So gagawin nyo is summation of fx, i-add nyo lahat ng x component. So itong F1 is 4 kips. What is 4 kips? Kilopounds. Okay? 4 kips is 4 kilopounds, or that simply means 4,000 pound force. Okay? Yung 9 kips is 9 kilopounds, or that is equivalent to 9,000 pound force. Okay? So F1 is along the x, so 0 ang kanyang y. Okay? And the x component is already equal to 4 kips. Hindi nyo na kailangan maglagay pa dito ng cosine. Okay? Because it is already lying on the x. Wala kayong multiplier dyan. F2 hanggang F5, yun, meron na kayong multiplier. Okay? So for Rx, this one, the solution is 4 kips plus 9 cosine 60 minus 8 sine 15 minus 25 cosine 30 minus 3 cosine 20. Okay? Okay na yung ano mo?
Online?
Online. So the y component, ganun din. No? If you are going to make use of the 15 degrees, since with respect to y siya, then vertical components use cosine. Okay? So ito yung negative yung Rx, positive yung Ry. So the resultant is what quadrant? Negative x, positive y. What quadrant is that?
Quadrant 2.
Ha? What quadrant?
Quadrant 2.
Okay, second quadrant. No? So we can expect that the resultant lies on the second. Now, when we get the angle, so arctangent of Ry, Rx, 56.3 degrees above the negative x. Ito, no? Above the negative x. Now, kung standard angle, ito siya. 123.7. Okay? But we do not make use of this. Ito yung mas gusto ko, yung acute angle, so that we will be dealing only with smaller angles. So 32.5 kilopounds, 56.3 degrees above the negative x-axis. Should be that description, no? Pero kung sinabi nyo lang above the x-axis, mali yun. Kasi meron tayong dalawang x. the positive and the negative. Okay, so since nasa second quadrant to, kasi nga dahil sa sign nito na negative yung x at positive yung y, then this should be on the second quadrant. So the description should be 56.3 degrees above the negative x-axis. Okay? Okay, the summary. Okay, to sum it up, okay, the resultant is the single force that represents all the given forces, the vector sum. Okay? Now, rectangular components, ito yung x and y components. So this formula can be used only if the angles are referenced along the x. Okay? Pero kung along the y yung angle theta, then there will be a reversal of these two functions. So pag fx, magiging sine to. Pag fy, cosine naman dito. So nagre-reverse sila. Okay? Kapag yung angle theta is referenced along the vertical or along the y. Okay, this is the Pythagorean Theorem in finding the resultant. Okay? And this is the angle of the resultant, inverse tangent or arc tangent. Okay? Component method, ito yung kaninang diniscuss natin, wherein we sum up all the x components and we also sum up all the y components. Okay? Okay, answer also the exercises and the post-test. Ito. Okay? So that is to be submitted next meeting. Okay? Maglalagay na lang ako sa Google Classroom ng kung saan nyo ilalagay itong mga isa-submit. Okay? So ang sasagutan nyo is lesson 1 and the self-assessment of lesson 2. Okay? Now all the activities must be written on an 8.5 by 13 inches bond paper or yellow pad, long yellow pad, no? And then use blue ball pen. Use blue ball pen and then scan all your original papers before uploading. Okay? Then send to the Google Classroom. So maglalagay na lang ako ng submission window dito sa Google Classroom. Okay? And then the solution, by the way, is only written from top down to bottom. Ayoko nung hinahati sa dalawa yung papel. May left, tapos sa right. Okay? Just a single column from top going downward. Okay? And then no writing at the back. No? Only the front portion.
Sir. Sir, ask ko lang po sir kung next week po yung next meeting po.
Ha?
Ask ko lang po sir kung next week po yung next meeting, yung submission po nung...
Oh, so kailan ba to? Thursday. Same time.
Ay,
Okay.
hindi po next week ang submission ng pinapagawa. Next Tuesday.
Ngayon.
Next week.
No,
next
this week, no? Kasi masyadong late na tayo nag-start. Okay, so I will not use the entire time, 1.5 hours, no? Because I know some of you may be using data. Eh kung uubusin ko yun, kawawa naman kayo sa ibang subject, baka maubos yung data niya. So, after I finish the lecture, then you can go over with the activities para ma-start nyo na. Okay? Para bawas na yun sa gagawin nyo kapag gabi. So, make use of the remaining time. Halimbawa, nag 1 hour lang tayo, so may 30 minutes pa kayo para gawin or makapagsimula ng mga requirements. Okay? Any questions? Okay, by the way, yung after uploading, compile your original papers. Compile on a blue folder, fastened on top. Okay? Because I'm going to collect them before the midterm, and before the finals. Dalawang beses ako magko-collect ng mga papers. Your compilation will already serve as your portfolio, no? Portfolio of original documents. Okay? So after uploading, compile para hindi na mawala. Kasi minsan nawawala yan. Okay? So after ma-upload, i-compile, i-fasten sa folder para hindi na mawala. Okay? I'm going to collect them before the midterm, yung mga topics sa midterm, and before the finals, dun sa topic para sa finals. Okay? Now, whatever you have uploaded, i-compile na, wag nang baguhin. Kasi I'm going to compare yung nasa portfolio and yung dun sa in-upload nyo. Kapag meron kayong binago sa portfolio, you will get a 0 point for the portfolio. Okay? So kung ano yung in-upload, wag nang baguhin yung portfolio. Kung nagkamali, then let it be. Okay? Wag nang baguhin because once na binago nyo at na-compare ko yan, okay? That is actually cheating, no? Kasi nag-pass na kayo tapos pinalitan nyo. Okay? So do not erase, do not white it out. Okay? I-compile lang, wag nang magbago ng sagot. Kasi pag once na binago nyo yan, so parang na rin kayong nag-cheat, no? Kasi I'm going to grade also the portfolio. Pero kung ano yung in-upload nyo, yun yung original na answer ninyo. Okay? Pero pagdating sa portfolio, iba na yung answer nyo. Well, that is almost equivalent to cheating, no? Kasi you change the answer. Okay? So, i-upload. Walang magsasabi, sir, humina yung internet. Okay? Kaya hindi ako nakasubmit. So, dapat have a stable internet. Okay? Kapag mag-upload na kayo, dapat yung internet nyo ay in good condition, no? Kasi pag malate, late na yon. That will be a deduction also. Okay? So kung alam nyo na kung saan nyo before, alam na mayroong stable internet, doon kayo mag-upload ng mga homeworks, activities, para dire-diretso. And wala kayong way na sabihin sa akin, sir, hindi ko pa po na-upload kasi mahina. Huwag niyong i-reason yun sa akin, no? So have a stable internet so that before the deadline, nakahabol kayo. Okay? O, any questions? Kasi may deduction na yan. Unfair naman dun sa mga nakapag-submit on time or before the deadline. Okay? O, any questions? And then refer to the syllabus na in-upload ko. Meron akong in-upload. Just refer to that. Now, any engineering mechanics or statics book, marami tayo dyan sa library. So if you happen to visit Seng, maybe you can borrow books from our library. And also, you can borrow from the main library. Yung library natin na bago dun sa may IPSR, no? Dun sa may grandstand, meron dun bagong library. Okay? So maraming books. Minsan, hindi nyo kasi makikita yung statics. Nasa loob siya ng engineering mechanics. Kasi dalawa nga yun, no? Statics and dynamics. But we are only on the first part. Okay, so any book pertaining to statics, ano nga yung blue? Kasi Singer and Season?
Singer, Miriam.
Oh, may Singer, by Singer, yung blue book. Kasi, pero old book na yun. Pero okay din yun, no? The principles are the same. Hibler, Johnston.
Online, marami sa ano.
Okay, from online also, no? You can refer. Okay, so any questions? By the way, give me your COR, no? So you just send through my messenger. Lahat ng COR. Ngayong SEM, no? First SEM. Para makita ko kung officially enrolled or hindi, no? Okay, John Ray, bakit wala ka pang COR? What happened?
Good morning po, sir. Di ko po alam sa registrar po, pero nakapag-fill up na po ako ng consent form and yung sa BOSAS po. So, hinahantay ko na lang po yung COR po. Tig-follow up ko na din po.
Anong araw ka nag-fill up?
On time po,
Baka
sir,
late ka
kung
na.
kailan po. Po?
Baka late ka na nag-fill up, kaya na-late ka rin, wala ka pang
Hindi,
COR.
di man po, sir. Yung date talaga po ng pag-release po ng G-Forms, yung time din po yun na nagpasa po ako nag-fill up po ako ng mga G-Forms po. Then nag-send na po ako agad.
Paano nyo malalaman na natanggap yon yung pag-fill up nyo? Meron bang in-acknowledge ba ng system ng BU or ng ORS after filling up? May nire-reply ba yung BU na nag-enroll kayo or you are accepted? Wala. Wala lang? After na...
Yaman po, sir. May may copy po ng consent form na tig-fill upan sa BU email po.
Okay.
Sa list na sa mailing ang minuto na.
So may ini-email sa inyo. So follow up mo na lang sa registrar, ha? Yung
Sige po,
COR.
sir. Thank you po. Let ko na lang po sa iyo, sir, pag meron na po.
Oo. Lumalabas dito sa atin ngayon is 29 kayo, no? But based sa sa ORS 23 lang. So bakit dumami? May umattend ba ditong from Block A? Wala.
Wala man po, sir.
O bakit 29 na kayo pero sa lista ko only 23? So wala pa ikaw John Ray, Alemania, o wala ka nga dito kasi ang start dito sa ORS si Baldon kagad. Baldon, Barbudo, Belen.
Ibang block po ata yan, sir.
Ay,
Ibang block
to.
po yan ata, sir.
Okay, ibang block. Sandali. I-check ko lang, ha. Saan ba yun? Faculty Center. So block B is nakalagay dito 27. Okay? O 27. So may kulang na dalawa. Okay?
Siya sa
Sino yung wala dito? Sandali, ah. Sana yun? Hindi ba ito makaka-capture?
capture yung
Ito.
ito sa kayo print screen.
Dito. Ayun. Ay, hindi. Ano lang to?
Here yan.
Paano yun, sir, makaka-capture?
Capture gabos.
Oh, ini.
Ayan yung screen.
Uni.
Okay. Pinilipat ko dyan.
So, dito sa screen.
Oo.
Pero ano naman siya?
Share screen mo siyan.
Oh, ini.
I-share ko siya. Hindi siya sa share screen ito. Ini. Teka dyan.
Oh, ini na nga. Kaya hindi man siya nag-appear.
Hindi ko naka-share. Check tayo magaling. Check tayo magaling sa Google. Sa Google, saan ka? Sa Google Chrome.
Oo, sa Gmail.
Check mo sa Instagram mo. Yan. Check mo. Oning tab. Yan. Ito. Bicol University.
Yan.
Sa video niya na.
Ito.
Na.
Oo.
Ako na makunain.
Oh, wala pa nga si John Ray, Alemania. Si Argarin pa lang, Asansa. Ito. Nakikita nyo?
Yes po.
O 27 lang dito, si Villamea ang last. So merong dalawa. Kasi ngayon, sa Gmeet, 29 kayong naka-in. No? So, sino yung dalawa sino yung isa aside from John Ray?
Ako po, sir.
Sino?
Ako po, sir. Jerwin po.
Jerwin Bersabe. Okay. So ikaw ang wala. Oo, kayo ni anong nangyari sa'yo? Nakapag-fill up ka ba ng Google Form?
Opo, sir. On time po ako nag-fill up. Di man naman po ako nagpapaabot ng deadline.
So wala ka pa rin COR?
Wala pa po, as of now.
I-follow up ninyo ha sa ano. Okay, so any more questions?
Excuse me po, sir.
Yes.
Yung ano po, sir, yung format para dun po sa exercise po na sasagutan.
Format, what do you mean na format?
Yung solution na lang po, sir, or
Oh, given a required solution. Given required solution. No? Of course, you need to
Clear, malinaw.
you need to copy the problem, no? Before you write the given. Dapat problem muna.
Malinaw.
Kasi hindi nyo naman susulat yung given kung wala yung problem. So, rewrite the problem. After the problem, given, required, drawing, if needed, no? Then solution. Okay? So, illustration or free body diagram before
Importante yan sa statics.
solution.
Kinematics yun.
Okay?
po, sir. Thank you po.
Yun, you need to copy the problem. Then, after the problem, given, required, free body diagram, solution. Yun. From top to bottom, no? Pababa lang, ayoko ng left and right kasi nahihirapan akong mag-trace kung pupunta ba ako sa right or bababa muna ako bago ako aakyat, no? So isa lang from top to bottom, pababa. And then use only the front page. Do not use the back kasi minsan pag nagbablat na yung ink, hindi ko na mabasa yung sa front. Naghahalo-halo na yung blot ng ink tsaka yung sulat nyo, no? Okay? So use only the front page. And sumulat kayo na in a way na maintindihan ko. Huwag kayong magsasubmit na gagamitan ko ng magnifying glass or gagamitan ko ng
Yung file name nila, may pangalan. Pag-section. Kami sa nag-submit yan. Kami scanner number. Identify.
my file name.
Yung pangalan nila. Sa file na.
Yes, yung file para ma-identify,
Pangalan nila.
yung name nyo na lang, no? Para madali din sa akin mag-identify kung kanino yung papers. Okay?
Mapagalo ko para rename. Nag-rename ako.
Wala ka ba sa name? Ay sa list? Si Nicole? Ay, oo, wala. So ilang kayo? So that means more than... Ilang ba kayo ngayon? O di, mga 30 kayo sa ano? 30 kayo dito sa block. Ilan ba kayo sa block? Block B. Kasi 27 lang sa ORS. So, may tatlo kayong nagki-claim na wala pang COR. So, 27 plus 3. So, dapat 30 kayo. Okay?
Ulit ko na.
Okay, so if you have any questions, you can just message me. So thank you for your participation today. Okay. No, it's almost 12. So thank you for listening and i-download nyo na lang yung upload ko. Okay? So further questions, i-message nyo na lang ako. Okay, so goodbye class.
Bye po, sir. Thank you.
Goodbye, sir.
Bye po, sir. Thank you
Goodbye
po.
po, sir.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you po.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.